This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets here for you. The Kenyan bourse is going to be closed tomorrow for a national holiday here. It did close about 0.1% lower today, around 1,800 or so points, essentially in the same level it's been for the last couple of months, 32% lower. The S&P 500 across the ocean down about 0.3% at 1619 GMT. Traders keeping a close eye on stimulus talks between the White House and Congress going on in the United States. We'll also be focusing on Zimbabwean equities in about 5 minutes. One last thing on markets, if you've been considering buying stakes in some Ethiopian SOEs, take Ethiopian Airlines off the list of the firms you may be able to buy into. The country's finance minister says the planned sale of a minority stake is suspended since the airline, in his words, appears to be robust. Those are your markets. Here's what's coming up tonight. Zambia is on the brink of becoming the first African country to default on its international debt after the COVID-19 outbreak. South Africa selectively allows travelers from high-risk COVID-19 countries to come into its territory. And China's economy is bouncing back after the coronavirus slump. We'll cover all of that in the next 60 minutes or so. But let's start the hour in Zambia, where the clock continues to tick for the government to convince reluctant Eurobond holders to accept an interest payment holiday. Holders of Zambia's $3 billion worth of Eurobonds will vote on the 20th of October on the country's request for a 6-month suspension of debt service. Now, if these investors refuse Zambia's request, it may eventually become the first African nation to default since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. A core group of creditors have already rejected the proposal. Eurobond holders want the world's second largest producer of copper to sign up to an economic program with the IMF and to be a lot more transparent before they can start talking about restructuring its commercial debt. Zambia's debt levels are significantly above the Washington-based lender's thresholds. Still in the general region, the eagerly awaited Victoria Falls Stock Exchange has been granted approval to launch and start trading by the Securities and Exchange Commission of Zimbabwe. The official opening of the VFEX, or the VFEX if you want to call it that, is scheduled for Friday the 23rd of October at its new offices in Victoria Falls. But formal trading, however, will start the following week on the 26th of October. Now, the bourse is a subsidiary of the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. It will trade exclusively, though, in foreign currency. To date, we understand that over 80 companies in the financial and capital market sector have expressed an interest in listing on the VFEX. On to North Africa, Egypt's headline inflation accelerated to 3.7% in September, even as food prices declined. The annual rate climbed from 3.4% in August, potentially triggering some consultations with the IMF. Now, under a one-year $5.2 billion loan agreement signed back in June, Egypt committed to consult a technical team of the Washington-based lender if September's inflation reading was less than 6%, and the IMF board itself if it fell below 4%. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
Egypt's inflation has dropped significantly from a high of 33% in 2017 following the devaluation of the Egyptian pound to a low of 3.7% in September 2020, largely due to the drop in urban consumer prices. This is after the International Monetary Fund-led economic reforms catapulted the state to achieve more sustainable and inclusive growth.
Inflation has dropped below the central bank's target of 6% due to high supply of products into the market, especially food and essential goods. Demand by Egyptians did not keep up with the supply because of the economic austerity measures and the global hardships of 2020. It's usually considered a success to push down inflation, but to such low levels of 3%, it can lead to recession in Egypt's economy.
Now, officials from Cairo will have to meet with the IMF board to review the next step as a precondition of a $5.2 billion loan deal to Egypt. The low inflation rate has created a dilemma for the central bank. Should it keep interest rates high to sell treasury bills and protect the currency, but risk a slowdown on the economy? Or should it lower its key rates to encourage growth in an economy battered by the COVID-19 pandemic?
It prefers to pump more money to stimulate the economy and increase consumer expenditure, which will in turn rise inflation levels. The central bank says that inflation has dropped too much because of lack of consumer expenditure and demand, which pull down the prices of goods and thus inflation too. The bank doesn't want to lower interest rates in order to protect the local currency. Therefore, we will request from the IMF an alternative route.
According to most analysts, the IMF will give the government room until November to adopt its policy and raise inflation levels to its target of 6%. If it doesn't work out, then the central bank will have to resort to its unfavorable option and cut interest rates. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
All right, then a quick run through some company headlines for you. UK-based TLG Capital, through its Credit Opportunities Fund, has acquired a 49% stake in Opportunity Bank Uganda. That transaction makes TLG the largest shareholder of that particular institution. Founded in 1995, Opportunity Bank was originally a microfinance institution. It's since developed, however, into a commercial bank with 23 branches and several ATM points across the East African nation. In Kenya, the investment firm TransCentury has cut its commercial bank debt load by at least 40%. The move is part of the company's four-step turnaround strategy. TransCentury reported about $3 million in after-tax earnings for the half-year ending in June 2019. That comes after a debt restructuring deal that saw its subsidiary, East African Cables, cut its debt load by about $15 million and a 10-year extension to the tenure of its remaining debts. Further afield, Abu Dhabi investment company ADQ has signed an agreement with Lulu Group International to help fund its expansion in Egypt. Under the terms of the agreement, ADQ and Lulu will work collectively to develop up to 30 hypermarket stores and other operations across the Arab world's most populous nation. The expansion is expected to create some 12,000 jobs. ADQ was set up in 2018. It owns assets like the Abu Dhabi Port, Abu Dhabi Airport and the bus operator ADX. And in e-commerce, the e-commerce giant Alibaba is taking control of China's largest hypermarket operator, Sun Art Retailing. Sun Art is currently controlled by a unit of the Mullier family investments, one of the richest families in France. Alibaba will pay some $3.6 billion to double its effective stake in a Hong Kong-listed group to 72%. The tech titan, remember, is already China's largest single e-commerce player. That's a run through your company headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. We'll take a look at the latest revision to the list of high-risk countries that South Africa's banned as a source of travellers. And the construction industry in Ghana is looking to a rebound as restrictions in the country continue to ease.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how whole stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. On to West Africa now, Ghana to be specific. The architecture and construction sector there is slowly coming back to life. Pandemic restrictions had caused many building projects to grind to a halt, but as those restrictions are gradually eased, players in the industry are looking towards a rebound once the economy does improve. Here's CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai with this report from Accra.
9 level for the auditorium, yeah.
Senor Tete and his team of architects are finalizing details of their construction design. When the country went into lockdown due to the outbreak of COVID-19, they had to work virtually online. It was a difficult moment adjusting to the new normal. As restrictions are lifted, all hands are now on deck. But, like many businesses, his company has been hit hard by the pandemic.
We had projects that we were executing in Ghana, but funding was coming from abroad. And our client informed us that the funding had to be reduced and virtually came to an end because the people who were funding the projects were having problems with their businesses.
The coronavirus pandemic has not only affected cash flow, work at construction sites had to be suspended to curb the spread of infections, and that meant architects like Tete could not go to supervise their projects. While restrictions have now been lifted, it's a race against time to complete construction projects that have been delayed due to the pandemic. But architects say it may take a while for their industry to rebound as the economy has yet to recover. The World Bank estimates that the economy of developing countries like Ghana will shrink by 2.5% this year due to COVID-19.
We have a deficit of housing, deficit of hospitals, and so many other infrastructural projects. And just because of that, there's going to be work, but it's also subject to the economy being managed properly so that we can generate more income.
Even as business returns to normal, architects say their job will not be the same again after the coronavirus pandemic is over. The pandemic has presented new opportunities for the industry. They are now thinking of ways to develop designs that could limit the spread of illnesses in buildings. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
On to North Africa now. With more than 1/3 of Tunisia's graduates unemployed, many young nationals are now taking matters into their own hands and they're creating their own tech startups. One such firm is a company called Aker Robotics. It specializes in producing academic and industrial robots in its laboratories in Tunis, and it trains hundreds of children as well as university graduates. With that story, here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi.
Aker Robotics was launched by 3 PhD students in mechatronics engineering. Emna, Rahma and Khulud are trying to demystify robotics and to encourage the use of robots at schools and universities, as well as businesses across the North African country.
The idea of our company is to spread the innovation and creation culture instead of consumption. So we present to children and young adults, students and young professionals, 2 types of services. Training session in robotics, electronics, mechanics and programming, plus training session in software engineering.
The startup offers hardware and software products. For the hardware products, the company presents Aka Kids, which is a hardware kit for amateurs. It initiates learners to science, technology, engineering and mathematics. As for the software products, the engineers created Future Kids, which is software training for kids.
Our startup plan is to become a leading research center in robotics and technology. We are focused on interdisciplinary practical teaching. Children and even PhD students will find the right environment to improve their skills.
Tasneem Shabi is a high school student who dreams of studying engineering and creating her own robot. She often takes part in the workshops organized by Aker Robotics Club in the suburbs of the capital city Tunis.
When I joined the club, I didn't know anything. Aker Robotics introduced me to the world of robotics. Now I know how it works. The hardware and software of a robot are no longer foreign to me.
Tunisian authorities aim to build a modern and efficient startup ecosystem that will provide networking, mentoring, and funding opportunities for young entrepreneurs. Aka Robotics has recently signed an agreement with the prestigious City of Sciences and Technology in Tunis. The partnership agreement provides for the creation of a robotics club, a computer club, and a summer school in the robotics industry for children of different ages. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
To East Africa now. Tanzania's energy regulator says that the use of liquefied petroleum gas has gone up by at least 16% in volume terms in the last 12 months. Now, while LPG in Tanzania is relatively cheaper compared to the equivalent product in Kenya and in Uganda, many Tanzanian households still cannot afford to buy it. And that forces them to resort to less clean sources of energy. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lucando with that story.
Gas consumption in Tanzania is on the rise, but Mwanakombo Mohammed, a food vendor in Dar es Salaam, cannot afford to use it. She says charcoal is her only option.
It's easier to use charcoal than gas because charcoal is cheaper than gas. But it would be better for me to use gas because gas simplifies things. You cook faster and it's cleaner.
Retailing at around $7 for a 6-kilogram cylinder, Tanzanian gas is among the cheapest in East Africa. This vendor says lowering the price even further will help drive up sales.
Gas usage can increase if the government plays its part in lowering prices for Tanzanians. If there are costs that fall on the big distributors or importers, lowering them would help decrease the burden for buyers, because our prices depend on the prices we get from them.
There are more than 10 companies dealing in liquefied petroleum gas in the country. They imported 166,000 metric tons of gas in 2019 compared to 142,000 a year before.
According to the Ministry of Energy and Minerals, charcoal consumption in Dar es Salaam is equivalent to destroying 1,000 football fields of trees a day. The government hopes the increase in the use of cooking gas will not only provide a reliable source of energy for the city's 6 million residents, but will also reverse this trend.
Alongside the use of gas, alternatives to charcoal are also on the rise. This environmentalist and author says such energy sources will help save the environment.
More than 8 tons of alternative charcoal are being used daily in Dar es Salaam. This is a good step towards curbing the use of energy sources that hurt the environment, especially those that involve the cutting of trees.
Around 7% of Tanzanians are currently using cooking gas. Tanzania's government says it plans to raise this number to 50% in the next few years and hopefully save the environment in the process. Isaac Lucando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Let's head over to South Africa. Authorities over there have revised the list of COVID-19 high-risk countries whose travellers are banned, well, most of them anyway, from visiting the African country. Now, that list has just 22 countries. It's dropped from an initial figure of 60 when the country reopened its borders to international travellers on the 1st of October. The list of high-risk states still includes the United States, the United Kingdom, India, and Brazil, all of which have relatively high COVID-19 caseloads. Germany, Canada, Italy, Spain, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and the Philippines are the 7 new additions to that list of 22. People from high-risk countries who may visit South Africa fall into just 4 categories: business travelers, holders of critical skills visas, investors, and people on international missions in sports, arts, culture, and science. Visitors from across Africa are still welcome to visit South Africa, subject, of course, to following COVID-19 protocols. All right, then let's dig a little deeper into the details of these revisions to the list. Angela Coppola joins me now live from Johannesburg with more data on this. So, Angela, when we last spoke about this subject, the tourism sector had warned that the block list would be pretty detrimental to the tourism sector. Has that view changed with this latest revision?
Look, it's still too early to tell if the tourism sector is actually beginning to recover from that nearly 6 months worth of lockdown. The latest data that we've got is from August in terms of income from accommodation for the likes of hospital, hotels, guest houses and caravans. And that dropped by an astounding 82.4% year on year in August. Hotels saw an 86.2% year-on-year decline, and that was in income in terms of August as well. And then there's the wine tourism sector, which also has a problem. Wine SA is saying that its members have too much wine with not enough tourists on hand to buy it. They actually need to clear space from their cellars for this new harvest that's going to come in quite soon. They haven't provided any solutions yet, but it's compounded by the fact that alcohol, in fact, can't be sold on weekends. So that's 2 days worth of sales that are lost. It's also lost around $450 million since March, when that hard lockdown kicked in, and around 21,000 jobs have disappeared. So there's no data just yet about the 2 weeks worth of partial opening in terms of our borders, but it's going to take a long time before that picks up in any way or any means. And of course, that travel ban is still in place essentially for some of those countries that bring in most of the revenue for the tourism sector, Raman.
Indeed. But these set of requirements do still seem pretty contradictory, because on one hand, the Department of Home Affairs is saying if you want to come into the country, regardless of where you're coming from, you must have a negative COVID-19 test result. But given that, why still insist on this blanket ban approach? I mean, you're screening people anyway, so why not just let anyone in as long as they test negative for COVID?
Well, look, the party line, as far as we're told, is that they need a scientific baseline to monitor and to manage the country risk. And using this WHO model that they had used last time round appears to be the best and most objective, they say, manner to do this. Why there's a difference between a business traveller, for instance, and a leisure traveller, well, we've tried our luck. We've tried everything to try and get answers out of one of the three or all three of the ministers that are involved in this process, and we haven't heard a single rational reason just yet. And then there's another apparent U-turn that happened a little while ago. Foreigners who own property locally and want to spend the summer in South Africa because they want to get away from the winter in Europe or wherever it might be, and want to stay in the country for more than 3 months, are welcome to do so, regardless of what country they come from. So it's not a small group, strangely enough. Non-residents made up around 2.6% of all residential home buyers in Q2 of 2020. That's according to the latest data from FNB. That's up from around 2% in 2018. So there's another concession, I guess, and it might be moving in the right direction, but there's no logic at the moment, Rowan.
Indeed. This travel ban does cover people who are coming into South Africa, but do the same rules apply the other way around? If I was a South African citizen, for argument's sake, and I wanted to go to the United States, could I just hop onto a flight at OR Tambo and go to the US and come back, or do I need to ask the DHA whether I can go and come back?
Well, the DHA aren't really that involved in that. It appears that you can travel to South Africans can travel to several countries on the continent to start with. There's little anxiety there. South Africans wanting to go and travel to other continents, though, will need, obviously, a valid passport and, of course, a very recent test result. And it's probably around the same order of 72 hours worth of age in terms of that test result being negative. And that's most likely going to be presented at the airline staff desk at the point of departure at one of those 3 international airports that we have operating at the moment. But remember, the requirements for different countries differ, and quite widely, in fact. There may be onerous quarantine requirements, of course, for South Africans who are returning to South Africa after going to one of those red-listed countries that are on our list, for example. So we can travel to Djibouti, Tanzania, the Maldives, Turkey, and, ironically, Dubai, where the Guptas are hiding. We could also visit Switzerland at the moment. Incidentally, Switzerland was the first country to put South Africa onto its green list. And then, of course, there's Germany, a huge market for South African tourism, and vice versa. These countries, of course, watch what's happening in terms of caseload, in terms of infection rates, in terms of death rates, and can change the quarantine-free travel that's on offer at the moment to quarantine accommodation overnight. So it's still a bit volatile and touch and go. When you do leave the country, you don't know if you're going to be able to get in or if you're going to be able to get out without going into quarantine, Raman.
Indeed. We'll see how this plays out. It's a fast-moving situation. Angela Coppola in Johannesburg. Thank you. Now then, away from the business of trying to figure out what exactly is going on with travel in South Africa, time for a break. Here's what's coming up. China's economy is bouncing back after the pandemic slump. We'll be taking a look at the Q3 GDP data. And the Asian pod hotel model is now starting to trend in Bogota. We'll be heading over to Latin America and a few other places when we return.
taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time, it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back to the program. You're watching Global Business Africa. These are the stories making you headlines at this hour, starting in Libya, where military leaders from the country's warring factions have met in Geneva in hopes of a UN-brokered breakthrough that might pave the way for complete and permanent ceasefire. Now, the meeting marks the fourth round of talks involving the Joint Military Commission, and which are backed by the United Nations Support Mission for Libya. Elsewhere in Sudan, authorities say they're ready to cooperate with the International Criminal Court over charges faced by the former president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, and other ex-officials. A delegation led by the ICC prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, is in Sudan at the moment, investigating the conflict in Darfur that took place in the early 2000s. Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok said his government is committed to achieving justice. Mr. Bashir has been charged by the ICC with genocide and crimes against humanity. South Africa's Health Minister, Zweli Mkhize, and his wife have tested positive for COVID-19. Mkhize was tested on Saturday after showing mild symptoms. He's been at the forefront of South Africa's response to the pandemic. The health minister is urging citizens in the country to continue adhering to health protocols by wearing their masks, sanitizing correctly, and maintaining social distancing. The number of coronavirus cases in South Africa has now passed 700,000. And finally, bilateral ties between Israel and the United Arab Emirates have reached a new milestone as a first commercial flight from the Gulf state landed near Tel Aviv today. The Etihad flight landed at Ben Gurion Airport. Air traffic control welcomed the passengers in Arabic, and an official welcoming ceremony was held on the tarmac. Israeli news said the passengers included senior airline officials, businessmen, and journalists. That's a run through your Now, China's economic recovery stepped up in the third quarter as consumption and trade picked up steam. The world's second largest economy expanded by 4.9% in the July to September quarter compared to 2019. The pace was also much quicker than the 3.2% increase that China recorded in the second quarter. CGTN's Sun Ye has a breakdown.
A solid rebound. Authorities say the GDP jump shows the country's economy is steadily recovering lost ground. Thanks to the boost, the first 9 months of 2020 now amount to a slight 0.7% growth rate compared to last year.
Economic growth for the first 3 quarters shifted from negative to positive. Relations between supply and demand have improved, and the vitality of market economy has been enhanced. The national economy has continued steady recovery.
MBS says retail sales have risen for 2 months in a row, registering a hard-won 3.3% growth in September. Liu said Chinese consumers are regaining confidence as shown in their willingness to trade up and spend on non-essentials. Sales in cosmetics and jewelry items both saw 2-digit growth in September.
We've seen the figures coming from the Golden Week holiday too. Dining out, tourism and other spending are all recovering. We've seen household consumption steadily rise and making an ever bigger consumption to GDP. We look at the massive Chinese market and we believe the potential is huge. The growth of the domestic market will also contribute to the global recovery.
Officials say with market demand, investment and manufacturing all on the right track, China's recovery and growth would continue through the end of this year. The IMF expects China to be the only major economy to grow in 2020, projecting a growth rate of 1.9%. Sun Ye, CGTN, Beijing.
Here's a look at what global economists had to say about China's third quarter GDP data.
I think this is a very strong recovery in my opinion. If we look at the nominal numbers, the China's nominal GDP has already achieved about 72 trillion RMB in the first 3 quarters. That was up about 0.7% year on year. So we can also confirm that the China's growth or China's economy has returned to the pre-pandemic level. So other than the nominal numbers, if we look at the investment number, we look at the production numbers, I think those numbers are also returned to the pre-pandemic level. The domestic demand has been increasingly more and more important. And at the current economic size, I think China definitely can play a much bigger role to further boost domestic demand, to allow the domestic demand to play a bigger role in the Chinese economy. That will be also beneficiary to the global economy. So once the domestic demand is picking up in China, I think that's usually the good news. One of the key contributions from China to the rest of the world, also including ASEAN, is China actually provide a stable supply to the rest of the world during the global pandemic.
All the global economy are struggling to find positive note, and Chinese economy has shown some very promising trends. And because of this, as per IMF's analysis, the Chinese economy's contribution to global economy will increase by around 0.9% by 2025, and it will reach to 27.7%.
Chinese economy has been one of the impressive success stories. China is a world leader in e-commerce. With the superior infrastructure of the Chinese and innovative logistics, I can say that the Chinese government or the Chinese e-commerce companies have successfully managed to take the e-commerce to the very rural area, which is the most challenging thing in other parts of the world. This is very much impressive. Chinese e-commerce is a huge success. So the Chinese e-commerce, the success behind the e-commerce contributes a lot to the Chinese economy.
Under the terms of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, or the JCPOA agreement, if you want to use its formal name, a 13-year-old arms embargo on Iran was lifted. But in the last few months, the United States has moved to block that. Instead, it's demanding that sanctions be automatically reimposed on Tehran. From Washington, here's CGTN's Nathan King exploring how this move could further aggravate tensions between the United States and Iran.
Iran will again be prohibited from ballistic missile testing.
Back in August, the US tried to convince the United Nations Security Council to reimpose UN sanctions on Iran and suspend lifting the arms embargo against Tehran. It failed. Only one other council member voted with Washington. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal has been backed by the council, while the US formally withdrew from the pact in 2018. And US allies maintain the deal was still in force and that Washington had no right to force a so-called sanctions snapback because it was no longer party to the agreement.
America first is essentially America alone, because even the closest allies of the United States, Europeans, have publicly opposed this move at the United Nations. It's really uncharted territory also, because they're trying to use mechanisms of a deal that they so publicly announced that they're leaving.
But the US continued to pile on the pressure. This month, the US announced even more sanctions targeting Iran's banks and has warned allies that they too must comply with US actions or face consequences themselves.
By these actions, we have made it very clear that every member state in the United Nations has a responsibility to enforce these sanctions. That certainly includes the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. We will have every expectation that those nations enforce these sanctions.
While the European Union powers, Russia and China, are standing by the deal and trying to convince Iran to remain in it too, there is an understanding that the US controls much of the world's financial system. Resuming arms sales to Tehran or even conducting normal business is fraught with difficulty. October the 18th may be the date that the arms sales to Iran can resume. But the real date everyone is looking at is November 3rd, the date of the US presidential election.
Everyone is watching this US election very carefully. Some in Iran might even be watching it closer than many Americans, because the implications of US foreign policy on certain populations is more than on certain Americans. So Iranians, if Biden wins, will have a completely new window of opportunity of this return to the nuclear deal and the re-engagement in diplomacy and the opening of the economic space. Whereas if President Trump stays, then that has to be another 4 years of thinking. Tehran might shift policy, but they're definitely waiting for that date.
Joe Biden has vowed to return to the Iran nuclear deal should he become president. But it's not clear whether his administration would lift all sanctions imposed by the Trump administration or rejoin without further commitments or concessions from Tehran. Tehran maintains that Washington must lift additional sanctions and rejoin the agreement first, without any preconditions. The maximum pressure campaign by the Trump administration against Iran may not have forced it back to the negotiating table, but it has shifted the politics of the greater Middle East. More and more countries are isolating Iran and moving towards Israel. The deep, hard sanctions have affected the Iranian economy and especially its people. Going back to the days of just after the Iran nuclear deal in 2015 will be difficult diplomatically and politically for any incoming Joe Biden administration. Nathan King, CGTN, Washington.
Now, into the hospitality sector. When we talk about pod hotels, you more often associate that idea with Asia, Japan, South Korea, that sort of thing. But now you can find them in Colombia. The concept apparently was brought into the country by a group of college students, and now they're planning their fourth capsule hotel. Here's CGTN's Michelle Beguet with that report.
Colombian college student Álvaro Ovalle got the idea for his business during a trip to Europe with friends.
We saw that in most places hostels were full, and it was that uncomfortable situation where you wanted to leave early so as not to see your neighbour. Then there was the second option of staying at a hotel that cost €200 a night. So there was nothing in between the two options that would be nice, homey and cheap.
The solution, a pod hotel where travelers sleep in a personal space just large enough to fit a single bed. Bathrooms are communal, but separate for men and women. The concept began around 40 years ago in Japan and expanded to cities across Asia. One research report forecasts the capsule hotel market could reach 226 million by the end of 2022. Alvaro Ovalle and his college friends launched their own capsule hotel in Colombia 3 years ago and have quickly expanded. They are about to open a third hotel in Bogotá and have opened their first in Medellin.
People are finally understanding that there is no need to stay in a huge room when, in the end, all you will do there is sleep or maybe just watch television. In a pod, you have your tablet and you will be paying 50 or 60% less than what you pay in a conventional hotel.
In Colombia, a pod costs around $8 a night. During the pandemic, the hotel owners say they abide by all the public health measures mandated by the government.
If you stay at a hostel, if you cough, you sprayed the air where others are sleeping in bunk beds near you. Here you are in your module that has you isolated, which minimizes your contact with others.
Colombia resumed international flights in September, which could be an opportunity for this new capsule hotel chain. For travelers on a budget, the owners say their enclosed pods offer what may be the safest hotel accommodation during the pandemic. Michelle Vega, CGTN, Bogotá, Colombia.
On to Beijing. Over 70 teams from top universities around the world competed in an annual robotics event over the weekend. And instead of being operated by voice or remote control, these particular robots had to walk, jump and navigate obstacles on a racetrack by themselves. Take a look on what's hot tonight.
Once you fall, you're out. This year's international competition for autonomous running intelligent robots, or Running Robot 2020, featured a hard obstacle race. Not one team managed to finish the game during the two-day event.
Last year, the tracks were all white, and the students were allowed to help their robots steady themselves. But this year, the tracks are in different colors and even track patterns. It could seriously confuse the robots, and students are not allowed to touch their robots during the game.
Unlike other robot competitions that focused on design and functions, Running Robot 2020 is a test for algorithms and computing skills. Students received the same models from designated companies 3 months ahead of the event, and then they started coding their robots.
So in the last 5 years, the application we already know get a lot of progress. The applications we don't know, still we don't know. You know, any AI, we need the computational capabilities. The computing need power. We cannot rely our mobile device to implement everything.
这主要难点是2块，我们是就动作的调试。
I'm in charge of the motion calibration. For example, I need to make sure the joints on its left and right legs move from the same angle so it doesn't fall. My teammates are in charge of vision detection system. The pandemic is adding to the difficulty this year because we haven't been able to meet in person until school opened last month.
However, the pandemic did not stop foreign teams from participating. Thanks to artificial intelligence itself, they built the same tracks on the computer and played a virtual game that's just as hard. Professor Huang Wei teaches at the University of Hamburg in Germany. He said the competition has extra importance amid the pandemic.
机器人在一个非结构化的环境里头，自动识别物体，找到。
We can see in the games that the robots would detect barriers ahead and bypass them. It could be applied in situations where robots replace humans to provide services in contaminated environments, or when robots need to rescue people from dangerous disasters.
So while the students might not have crossed the finish line at this competition, they are definitely not missing out on the future. 高颂雅 CGTN
All right, then a quick run through commodities for you. The OPEC Plus ministerial meeting today doesn't really seem to have done much to reinstall confidence in the market that the supplying group has its handle on affairs. Saudi Arabia and Russia, linchpin producers on the OPEC and the OPEC Plus side, have both been talking up the need for proper compliance with production quotas. But it's not 100% clear, really, what they can do to rebalance supply as Q4 rolls on. Libyan crude, for one, is firmly back in play, so who's going to cut back in order to accommodate them? On top of that, remember, Russia itself has actually blown past its own production quota by over 400,000 barrels. Brent crude down at least 1% at this point in time. Here's what's coming up next. Toyota is investing at least $4 million in a Ugandan firm that's offering SMEs credit facilities. We'll explore that next.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Aden, Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to East Africa. Toyota Group's trading arm has invested about $4 million in a Ugandan startup. Now, the firm says that it hopes that Tugende's small loans for businessmen in the informal sector might also provide financing eventually for clients to buy the company's vehicles. CGTN's Alexander Majala has that story on Grassroots.
For the last 3 years, Mark Yahweh has been earning his bread and butter from riding someone else's motorbike. But now, the 25-year-old just put down a down payment on a new bike. Ugandan company Tugende is behind the actualization of the young man's dreams. The firm seeks out people like Yahweh to lend funds to so that they can operate their own businesses.
For the terms and conditions, I find them to be favorable because when I go to a private motorcycle owner, he will lend you the motorcycle to drive, yet when I come to Tugende, they give me a motorcycle with taxes paid.
Toyota Group's trading arm is banking on Tugende's success and has invested $4 million, hoping that the firm's loan to small independent businesses will also help customers buy Toyota vehicles. Tugende was launched in 2012 when they began by offering motorcycle mortgages to riders. The bikers wouldn't get titles to the bikes until the final payment was made. The company's success is partially owed to banks' reluctance to lend money to small or informal businesses on the continent, fearing the high rate of default.
What we've realized is that there is an enormous demand for credit for small and medium businesses across Africa, and it's very difficult for them to access credit from most standard banks, and even a lot of technology-led lenders are small loans and very expensive. So the Tugende model is all about helping people own income-generating assets where the cash flow they make from their entrepreneurial activities can pay a loan or a mortgage or a hire purchase lease so that they go from renting to owning in a short period of time.
With an asset base of $30 million, Tugende has handed out about 35,000 bike mortgages so far, a small fraction of the Ugandan market, which it estimates has about 800,000 riders. The loan tenures go for 2 years, but according to the firm, more than 3/4 of clients pay it off early. The payments are made via mobile money service and other digital platforms. According to a 2017 International Finance Corporation report, the financing gap for micro, small and medium enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa is estimated at a whopping $331 billion. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
And finally, a story on the wine industry in South Africa. The country has a near 400-year history in that particular sector. The large-scale planting of vines on a much larger scale, in fact, started in what is today known as Bishop's Court in Wynberg. And South Africa's winemaking tradition has been growing from strength to strength ever since. Today, the country exports over 400 million litres of wine a year. CGTN spoke to a winemaker who is inspiring her gender across the world.
I've realized that I inspire women across the board. It's not just black women in South Africa, it's not just white women, it's just women in general across the board. I got recruited from high school. I was offered a scholarship by South African Airways. So that's basically what brought me into the industry. I didn't even know it existed, you know. So for me, I wanted to study, and this was an opportunity to change my life and study. Delheim was the first place that I came to. When you came for an interview, they were like, so do you know anything about wine? And I was like, I don't, but I'll learn. I remember the general manager here, it was Harald. He was like, I'm going to a winemaker summit now, you're going to come with me. And I got all excited because I'm like starting to be a winemaker, so I'm going to go to the winemaker seminar until I got to the door. And then there was one woman, one. And she was registering everybody. It was all white people, and they were speaking Afrikaans, which was the language I didn't understand. For me, what made me stay, though, is the fascination, the vibe in the cellar during harvest. It was like festivity during harvest. It was just fun. So I did my harvest overseas. I did my harvest in France, Italy, visited New Zealand, USA, just to understand the whole thing. And I was making sure that I built bridges. I met people within the industry. And I decided that my company is going to be named after my late grandmother because she had been everything that a child could wish to have. So for me, she represented love in its totality. So I was like, the company is going to be called Aslina. We are currently producing 4 wines. We've got a Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Cabernet Sauvignon, and a Bordeaux blend called Umsasane. Umsasane, which is the acacia tree, an iconic tree in Africa. But the reason for it to be a bottle is because it's my grandmother's nickname. So that one is a double dose of grandma. We currently are 85% exports, and then the rest is sold locally. But we are building the local market. Being in farming in general, you're dealing with nature, and you need to understand that nature rules. No matter what we want, nature rules. So we had drought, but what came out is like as much as we had less volumes on what we wanted, but we had beautiful quality of wine. And all of a sudden we've got COVID-19, and it's again things that just happen that you, as a person, you've got no control over, and it blocks whatever you're trying to do. So you just need to go with the flow. As Black people, we do not have a generational wealth, and we do not have legacies. So when you're starting from zero, you need to actually put one foot in front of the other to be able to get what you want to get. So I need to work hard, sell the wine, make the wine, sell the wine, and from there, as the company grows, then I can start looking at actually at getting land to be able to have my vineyards and have a winery. I get some of my grapes at Delheim, and then somewhere in Stellenbosch in different farms. So I work with different farms.
We became more than just colleagues, we became friends over the years, and that's how Nsiki sort of grew into being part of our family business. It's been quite a difficult journey, I think, for Nsiki to actually step into an area where she was an outsider, and it's still probably for females more difficult in a male world to play the game that they do.
I've realized that I inspire women across the board. It's not just Black women in South Africa, it's not just white women, it's just women in general across the board. We all have same struggle. We're fighting to be seen, we're fighting to be heard. So for me, it is important as a woman to say, you know what, I've walked the path. So any woman can walk the path.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies for you. The big story really is all about Zambia, and it's likely to be like that for the next 30 days. The country is meeting holders of its 3 euro bonds tomorrow. The key notes at play here, the 3 of them in fact, one due in 2022, another in 2024. Those are both bullet notes, and a 2027 one with an 8.97% coupon rate. The currency is at about 2020 to the US dollar. It's actually fallen by over 40% in the last 10 months. The country missed a coupon payment on the 2024 note just last week, Thursday, and that has started a 30-day clock on its grace period on that $1 billion note. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There are many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.